it's going to be late if you're waiting for him.
Okay.
He texted me saying traffic's really bad. He said anywhere between 5 after and a quarter after.
What were we talking about?
By the time we get to everything.
Bill is in track. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today's date is June 27th, 2018. The time is 7:03 p.m. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting on the bulletin board in Village Hall, by mail to the Ridgewood News, the Record, and by submission to all persons entitled to same as provided by law of a schedule including the date and time of this meeting. Roll call.
Councilman Hache?
Here.
Councilman Seaton?
Here.
Councilman Boyd is not here. Councilwoman Walsh?
Here.
Mayor Newton.
Here. Please stand for the flag salute. Please join us in a moment of silence for our men and women serving our nation and all of our first responders. Thank you. Okay. As we begin the meeting this evening, if you're here to comment on the 2018 water rates ordinance 3637, please hold your comments until the public hearing for that ordinance. We'll have public comments at this time not to exceed 3 minutes per person, and these public comments would be unrelated to ordinance 3637, which will be the public hearing for that. So any public comments, feel free.
Just so everybody knows, they can comment on whatever they want. We just ask that you keep the ones for 3637 till the public hearing on that so it's on the record. If you want to comment on that right now, you can.
Thank you. Tim Shanley from Wyckoff. I'm the township committeeman from Wyckoff. I'm here on behalf of myself as a ratepayer and on behalf of my constituents of approximately 17,000 residents who are served by Ridgewood Water. We were here the other night till 3 in the morning. It was a very long meeting. Probably should have been continued to tonight. I see that Councilman Voigt is not here. He left at 12 midnight and did not come back, so I would have objected to him voting on it tonight because he missed 3 hours of testimony. But my concern is that Wyckoff residents, Glen Rock and Midland Park residents don't have an adequate voice on this ordinance. We had testimony of our expert, our attorney here, and I'm not confident that you're going to do anything but vote for this ordinance tonight. I hope you surprise me, but I think at some point we need a municipal utilities authority set up where there's equal representation from all towns that are served by Ridgewood Water. And I think we need an exploratory committee where we have 2 councilmen from each of the towns to explore the possibility of this. I'm calling for that, and I'm hoping you will agree with me that we need this exploratory committee so this isn't all governed by 4, or today it's 4, usually it's 5, members of the Ridgewood Village Council, because there are residents in Midland Park, Glen Rock, and Wyckoff that do not feel they're getting an equal voice from the village of Ridgewood. So you've heard our testimony from our expert that there's an approximately $13.4 million refund that should be coming to the ratepayers, which also include residents of Ridgewood. But you know, if you pass this ordinance tonight, 3636, you didn't hear anything from the experts that came from Glen Rock, Midland Park, and Wyckoff. Thank you.
Just to correct the record, Mayor, the Councilman Voigt left at 12:45. He was aware of the fact that he wasn't going to be here. Unbeknownst to me, he wasn't going to be here tonight. Stayed with the idea or the thought that there may be a vote on it that night. Once he realized by that time it wasn't going to happen, that's when he decided to leave.
All right, well, my apologies for not getting the time right, but it was a little disrespectful for the rest of the people here that had to stay until 3 o'clock, and we did stay. So we did feel a little bit disrespected by that.
Yeah, but he knew he wasn't going to be here, and as I just explained, he waited as long as he could so he could participate in the vote. Once he realized that it was going to keep going, we weren't going to reach a vote tonight, that's when he decided to leave. So he was being respectful to everybody for that purpose.
Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? Sure, come on up. Just state your name and address for the record, please.
Russ Camp, Midland Park Council, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I just would like to echo what Tim just discussed. And for the express purpose of, I can envision us going through this process each and every year, because neither your expert nor our expert is going to have a perfect report, perfect presentation. There is going to be a constant debate as to what is an adequate and appropriate indirect cost and what should that allocation be. And so what I would love to see is representation from each of the communities to come forward and decide once and for all what is an appropriate indirect cost, what is an appropriate allocation. And so when a rate is presented like it's going to be presented tonight and it's 6%, that there's some process that went into it so that each and every one of the constituents feels that they've been part of that process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Lorraine DeLuca, Council, Midland Park. I just want to say I'm also in support of what the two gentlemen just spoke about. In sitting here at the meeting the other night, you had stated that when you have meetings in regards to the Ridgewood water, you hold them separate than your other council meetings because it is a separate situation.
No,
Okay,
we hold them at the beginning of the meeting. We always separate it from...
Yes, you separate it.
So it's at the beginning, so you don't have to stay for the whole meeting.
Right, so you separate it. So the thing is, my comment would be is that being you separate it, I think that we should, that the three towns should have representation when this is being discussed. Okay, thank you.
So just for the record, that occurs at every single one of our council meetings, and to my knowledge, at no time over the course of several years that we've been doing this has any representation, has there been any representative from any of these municipalities here to weigh in on any of the items that we've discussed, so we appreciate that. Come on up. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Greg Brown, 444 Linwood Ave, Ridgewood here. I'm actually excited that we have a lot of council members from the other municipalities here, because as I've listened to all of this, and I think that one of the interesting topics is for all of us to kind of be good neighbors to each other, because we're all in this together as municipalities. So I've questioned this council a lot, and I'd be curious to maybe question the other municipalities that, as Councilman Walsh brought up on Monday night, we have a certain ordinance in town here that has restrictions within the stage 2. Now, it seems unfair that that ordinance is only targeting Village of Ridgewood. It's not, there are no similar ordinances in any of the other municipalities. So I would say, as a good neighbor, and as we sort of work together, and as you might want to get more representation, you know, a good step maybe years ago would have been to enact similar ordinances for water restrictions as we currently have in the village, especially with the fact given that we're all being serviced out of the same aquifer. So thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to comment on that? Did you want to comment on that? I heard you say so.
No, so did a little research, and it's actually, Wyckoff does have a water emergency, Chapter 183 water emergencies. It talks about water restrictions and the different stages of them. That was the one that I looked up because we were told that one didn't exist. But in fact, that there is one. So I'm happy to see that, because now we can work together at, having a united front with our conservation efforts.
And also, for the record, we have met in the past with representatives from each of the municipalities and encouraged each to adopt similar ordinances to ours. I don't believe that any have to date done so, but we can certainly follow up on that. I appreciate the comment. Please come on up. Good evening.
Thomas Madigan from Wyckoff. I'm a township committeeman. Just for the record, I want to be on the record again. This is the third meeting I've been at. I cannot hear the mayor appropriately. I don't know what she's saying. I'm glad to have a moment of peace other than first responders. I don't know what she's saying. So I'm just going to say as if she didn't say anything because we can't hear her. I think she does it on purpose. I brought it up before. She slurs her words. She goes through it very quickly. That's just for the record. Also for the record, I just want to note that in 2 previous meetings, the attorney for the village council, Mr. Rogers, made it abundantly clear he would not let us comment, and he used the words, I'm paraphrasing, you're not allowed to talk about anything legally on this case or anything that happened in court, yet the other night there were several things that were intertwined, and then it was okay to talk about what was on the record. So for 2 meetings he told us that we weren't allowed to say anything, and then the other night, when he was challenged and told he was intimately involved in the case, what the legality was, what the results were, what the judgment was, all of a sudden it became okay. The second thing is I just want to mention is we came here the other night. We were told specifically that you had added Wednesday night and that you were only going to 11 p.m., almost like, just so you guys know, there's a time limit. We're only going to go to 11 p.m., and then we get here, and then there's the discussion at 11 p.m. after the attorney representing our towns asked to properly speak with your witness who had been here in May, and you insisted that the witnesses from Wyckoff, Glen Rock, and Midland Park go first, our experts, knowing full well that your expert is not available on a Wednesday night, which is tonight. Therefore, you made us stay here till 2:45 in the morning, which was, for the record, unconscionable. The last thing is, I just want to say that I hope that there's a little bit of climate control tonight. I hope Mr. Voigt feels better. I know he left. I'm not sure where we're going with this. There's a lot of confusion, and I just hope wherever we're going, you try to give us a little view as far as what your plans are, what you want to do, because every time we come, it seems to change. Thank you.
Just for the record, I know that the mayor doesn't deliberately not want people to hear her, and the record's going to speak for itself. Whatever your perception is, the record will show that it was much different. Thank you.
And for the record, I just want to say I'm not one to slur my words at all. So just for the record. No, you can just sit down, point of order. We don't stand up and shout from the audience in this courtroom. I am soft-spoken, just, it's just how I am. Now, come on up. And I'm going to make sure you hear me tonight. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. I'm Nancy Kronk, Pete from 171 Hill Street, Midland Park, Councilwoman. I just wanted to speak on behalf of Midland Park. We do have a water restriction ordinance that regulates stage 1, 2, and 3 watering. So I wanted that to be noted by this. It's been in effect probably over 18 years. So Midland Park does abide by that. So thanks so much.
We so appreciate that. Thank you. Anyone else? Public comment? Come on up.
Hi, good evening. Gregory Reed, Sills, Cummis, and Gross on behalf of the ratepayers. I'll be very brief. Just 2 short points, as it seems clear that you intend to vote on Ordinance 3636 tonight. I'm not quite sure how you can do that 2 days after we had an 8-hour meeting, and my understanding was that a court reporter was necessary for that meeting, and we had to incur that cost so that a transcript could be made, presumably so that you could review that transcript. To my knowledge, there's no way such a transcript exists yet. That's one point. The second one, I just want to make sure you're clear on what you're doing here. If you do pass this ordinance as written, you're taking the position, among other things, but specifically that any improper charges that were made prior to 2010, we had a whole trial about this, lasted weeks, years of litigation. You're just ignoring that. You're saying it doesn't matter. We get to keep all that money. You're not reflecting that in any way, and I think that is pretty clearly improper.
So two things I'm going to respond. The court reporter is not here for us to review a transcript before our meeting. That's not the purpose of the court reporter. My understanding is the purpose of the court reporter is to establish a record in the event the court needs for review.
Well, what happens is that we have a reorganization on July 1. This is in one of the letters I sent to you, Mr. Reed. The reason why we needed to get this done before then is because we can't carry over ordinances into the new council that's going to begin as of July 1. So we have to adopt all the minutes beforehand. So rather than have minutes transcribed, because it wouldn't happen as quick, we're going to have a transcript and use that as the minutes. Whether that gets used in a further legal proceeding is of the consequence of whatever the attorneys decide to do. But the reason why we needed the court reporter is because we needed to have minutes to vote on and adopt before the end of this council's term. So that was the reason.
Okay. So it has nothing to do with us having to review the record before this meeting. It has no relationship to that whatsoever. And I guess in terms of your assertion of improper charges, I think we'll just agree to disagree. Thank you.
Okay, but we can agree that this ordinance ignores any improper charges.
Yeah, that's your comment. We appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Just an answer to that one, I'll do it. Yeah, the ordinance only deals with the rates for 10, 11, 12. That was the court's directive.
So
That's what we dealt with.
hypothetically,
That's what we dealt with.
hypothetically, if the court found millions of dollars in overcharges for that earlier period, you're saying, okay, we get to keep that anyway.
Okay.
That's your position.
Okay, let me just remind you, this is public comment. This is not a rehashing of our previous discussion. So if that's your comment,
We've never had this discussion. I just wanted to make that one
Okay.
discrete point to make sure you understand that that's what you're doing. And if you're okay with that,
Again,
act
We believe,
accordingly.
we understand that's your position.
Okay.
That's your
Thank
position,
you.
right. Thank you. Any other public comments? All right, with that, we will close public comments. Okay, Matt, do you want to go over rules of procedure for the evening?
Well, I don't know that there's any, at this point in time, the public hearing was closed on Monday night or Tuesday morning, and the matter is now set for the council to make any comments or review what it may want to do in regard to this. And then after that, we have the public hearing on 3637, but just with regard to the next step, this is what's happening now on 3636.
Very good. I move the clerk read ordinance 3636 by title on sixth reading of the public hearing thereon be open.
Second?
Hache,
Yes.
Sedin,
Yes.
Walsh,
Yes.
and Newton.
Yes, will the clerk please read the title of ordinance 3636?
Yes. An ordinance of the Village of Ridgewood in the County of Bergen, New Jersey, amending Chapter 269 of the Ridgewood Village Code, Water, and Code Chapter 145, Fees, to reestablish the water rates and fees for the 2010 through 2017 calendar years.
Right. As our village attorney, Matt Rogers, just indicated, the public hearing on ordinance 3636 was held on June 25th, 2018, and was closed. Ordinance 3636 has been continued to this evening's meeting for the final comments from this village council and a vote on the ordinance. So with that, we'll go on with comments and discussion among council members. Do you want to start, Deputy Mayor?
Okay. So this is, this council comments right now, public comment has just been closed. I apologize.
Public, I'm sorry. All right, I'm sorry. All right, we don't shout from the audience. We do not do this, and I will have you removed from this courtroom if you're you cannot shout from the audience. Point of order. We will do it one more time, just since nobody else seems to be complaining, but we will do this. I can't help them. I am speaking into the microphone. As the village attorney indicated, the public hearing on ordinance 3636 was held on June 25th, 2018, and was closed. Ordinance 3636 has been continued to this evening's meeting for the final comments from the village council and a vote on this ordinance. Therefore, the village council will have comments and discussion amongst themselves. As I indicated, I'm fairly soft-spoken, and apologies if you can't hear. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So, I've listened to everything that's been said. I've read the reports during this entire time. I've read the 2 reports from Howard Woods. I read the critique rebuttal from Exeter. Howard Woods' report found, through independent calculations of his own, that although the 2010 21% rate increase looked excessive by itself, the increase should have actually been higher. It should have been around 22%. That was stated through testimony. For about 7 years before that, there was no rate increase, and we had to catch up because the village taxpayers were footing the bill. When sales fall short, that's what happens. Using the allocation factors in the report, shared expenses between the village and Ridgewood Water will be properly allocated going forward. The Exeter report was not a rate study, it was a critique. It did not offer any specific recommendations on how to do things differently. It merely said that some things were wrong, but some errors were made. The Exeter report also said that no cost for emergency services should be included, but it did not recognize that one of the firefighters is the hazmat responder for the utility, and it didn't recognize that police provide security and consulting for facilities, nor did it recognize that the Parks and Rec Department does tree maintenance and cuts grass and similar situations in facilities throughout Ridgewood. Through their testimony, Exeter did not attempt to identify what services were provided by police, fire, or any other department. They just simply said they shouldn't be paid for. The recalculated rates showed close agreement based on Wood's report. Therefore, retroactively, adjustments should not be made according to Howard Woods. The report said surplus was also a big issue, and the report addressed some of that. The surplus resulted from the use of the actual rates represents only 0.88% of the 3 years, 2010, 11, and 12, revenue requirements calculated using actual expenses, which is stated in the report and legally allowed by the state of New Jersey and the BPU. The surplus was a big issue, and testimony showed that there wasn't enough revenue allocated to capital improvements prior to 2016. We did hire a new director for the water utility, and he reevaluated the utility's needs, explained pending fines from the EPA administrative orders, and showed a need for a massive investment to upgrade a complex and difficult to manage utility. We are currently in the 3rd year of a 6-year, approximately $44 million upgrade. Other towns, as we found out through the testimony, are not enforcing water conservation restrictions, while Ridgewood taxpayers are being ticketed and violated for that ordinance. Again, a burden of Ridgewood that is not shared by other towns. The shared services the village provides keeps costs low, and Ridgewood water rates are very competitive with surrounding utilities. The village also issues general obligation bonds to finance improvements for the utility. The village is taking on risk to raise capital for the utility and the compliance risk associated with being the owner and operator of utility. The state and BPU recognizes this and allows for utilities such as Ridgewood Water to transfer 5% of the revenue to the village's general fund to compensate the owner for these risks. Using general obligation bonds is less expensive for all Ridgewood Water customers than using revenue bonds. The 21% rate increase in 2010 is basically what brought on the current lawsuit. It seems all at once and out of context that it may have been improper and that, it brought on this litigation. When we put it into context, we find that it actually should have been higher. The study shows that we would be relatively in the same place today, even if different allocation methods were used, such as the ones used by Howard Woods in this current study. Therefore, that is why I'm supporting Ordinance 3636.
Thank you. Councilman Hache?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I don't have much to add. I do just want to make sure that everyone understands that, in this function, as council members, we take this job very seriously. We're both stewards of taxpayer dollars as well as stewards of the ratepayers of Ridgewood Water. But I'm also respectful of our judicial system. Now, we were ordered by a judge to hire an expert to conduct this rate study. It was not at our discretion. We were ordered to do this. And we did. But again, going back to the point of being stewards, we wanted to make sure that we hired the best expert on the field, and that's Mr. Howard Woods. He's handled countless cases involving water rates for municipalities that apply enterprise accounting, and we wanted to make sure that he was also independent, which he was. I mean, I've never had a conversation with the man. This was all on his own due diligence and his conversations with the different departments and the village. So that was very important. And again, as a steward, we wanted to ensure that this was an open, fair, and transparent process. And it was. We had countless meetings. We had countless public meetings here. We gave the public plenty of opportunity to ask questions. We brought in Mr. Howard Woods, I think, on 3 separate occasions, or if not 4. So, I'm happy about 2 things that were brought to light by Mr. Woods' work. One is that Ridgewood Water is a well-run, professionally run operation under the guidance of Rich Calvi now. I think we've seen the benefits now of the efficiencies that we have attained. And that validates the 6-year, $40 million+ capital improvement program that we have engaged in. So I'm glad, again, as a steward to the ratepayers and taxpayers, that work is continuing and is being done well. The other thing that I'm happy about is that looking back at the rates charged based on Mr. Woods' work, we were not that far off the mark. And again, as a steward, I'm just happy that no great injustice was committed here. Now, we had plaintiff bring in their experts to present their case. And, I have to say that was not very convincing in my view. It was simply a critique of someone else's work. I can sit here and criticize how Tom Brady throws a football, but I can't go out and actually do the work that he would. Probably would have carried more credibility if they had done an actual rate study and said, look, we actually did this, went through the exercise, and this is what we came up with. Instead, there was a lot of nitpicking and focusing on some very small items, and even within that, not taking the time to really talk to the different departments to see how the functions within the village work. It's a very complicated system here. It's a municipality, and it has a lot of interdepartmental dependencies, and there's a lot of functions that may not seem clear to someone who's not well-versed in how they function and operate. And I think that a little more time focusing on that would have just garnered a little more credibility in the process. An inordinate amount of time was spent on nitpicking on very small things. For example, police. This is a $39,000 allocation. I mean, that's not even a quarter of a percentage point when you look at the grand scheme of what the total budget for Ridgewood Water is. It's not even a rounding error. So why focus so much on that if, in fact, we were talking about much bigger problems and much bigger issues? We spent, most of the time in this cross-examination focusing on these allocations to the police. And along those lines, I want to bring up another issue that came up, and that was when Mr. Fiorenzo was questioning Mr. Woods about the allocation factors. And here's the manual. You find where those allocation factors are addressed in the manual. And I bring this up so that if a court reviews this, and I expect that the court will, the court is aware that the American Water Works Association manual, the M1, which we talked about, does refer to allocation factors. Even though Mr. Woods couldn't find the place when asked on Monday night, they were there. So now going back and looking at it, but to me, interestingly, Mr. Fiorenzo stated that he couldn't find it, and Mr. Morgan from Exeter stated that he couldn't find it either. But they both had time to look, since they knew the question was coming. This was part of the cross-examination. So this goes to credibility as well. So that's all I have to add. As I'm voting in favor to reestablish the water rates for 2010, 2017.
Councilman Walsh.
Try to lean forward so that I can speak in. Yeah, needs to just be a little longer. I want to thank the governing bodies and residents and ratepayers of Glen Rock, Midland Park, Wyckoff, and Ridgewood for attending the meetings and providing input. As the Board of Directors for Ridgewood Water, every ratepayer is our client and deserves to be heard. As the prior ordinances, not the rates, were invalidated by court ruling, we were tasked with hiring an expert and reviewing and providing an analysis of the rates. You can't hear me? You're shaking your head? No. Okay. You disagree? Okay, sure, okay. In November 2017, the Village Council and the Village Manager chose Howard Woods to provide his services and produce a report and rate study for Ridgewood Water. He was and is independent of the Village of Ridgewood. I'm confident in his credentials as presented and his role in the process. I've read his report and his findings and was present at each of the meetings regarding the same. I feel he has presented a thorough reporting of the Ridgewood water rates to the council and to the public. Simply stated, the task was to review the rates from 2010 to 2016 using the data from those years, both budgeted and actuals. It's understood that this study used standard techniques in the industry to come up with those results. Mr. Woods interviewed staff, reviewed budgets, reviewed audits, and asked pertinent questions, all in anticipation of reporting his unbiased results for the study. As I understand from my review of the documents and testimony provided, the revenue requirement versus the revenue generated are all in close agreement, meaning that a hindsight review of the data shows us that the water utility was running efficiently and within acceptable standards with regards to those rates. His data showed the results over the years varied slightly but within reason. It gives a layman's understanding of the process and policies of allocation. Ridgewood Water is solely owned by the Village of Ridgewood, and as such, this enterprise operation shares services with the Village of Ridgewood. Those expenses are then allocated to Ridgewood Water. These types of allocations also provide cost savings to Ridgewood Water, since it does not have to provide standalone services, as we discussed the other night, police, fire, DPW, any of the services that might be needed by Ridgewood Water. It should also be noted that the surplus that's developed over the years is meant for the future benefit of all ratepayers. Competent management must plan for future events, variations in use, as seen with the weather-related challenges over the years, as we discussed with the water restrictions, aging infrastructure, and any other capital requirement needed to run the water company efficiently. I believe Mr. Wood's study and the accompanying data affirm the need to approve the water rates as presented in this ordinance. I understand and agree with his methodology, and I believe my council colleagues and I should vote affirmative tonight. And just as a closing note to all the ratepayers, we put Ridgewood Water first on our agenda each night to provide those in neighboring communities, as we mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, that don't plan on spending the whole night listening to other Ridgewood business, to let them come, provide information, provide input to Ridgewood Water, because that's when anybody is available to come in and make a comment. I myself recently challenged my council colleagues on what I felt was a large, unnecessary expenditure for Ridgewood Water. I hope all of you, those watching on TV, those in the courtroom, will provide similar input in the future.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Sorry, Mayor, just one note. As I talked about the AWWA M1, if you're so inclined to do so, look on page 29, at the bottom of the page, and going into page 30. It addresses the interdepartmental allocations.
Very good.
That Mr. Woods
Appreciate
used,
that.
so.
So we'll note that. Great. So for me, throughout this process, I actually attended almost all the court proceedings. I read Judge Fisher's ruling, read all of the reports and documents, reviewed evidence, and listened to testimony proffered by Mr. Woods, Ms. Sherwood, and Mr. Morgan. I've listened to the comments and questions of attorneys, elected officials, and residents of other towns, and based on that information, I'm prepared to vote. But before doing so, I want everyone to understand that this village council recognizes the importance of our job as stewards of Ridgewood Water. and appreciates that water is a precious resource that must be protected with diligence and used wisely. We take this responsibility very seriously. Ridgewood Water carries water over long distances and delivers it to customer homes ready for safe consumption. Infrastructure and water safety are addressed daily and responsibly. Water utilities are capital intensive, and operating and capital costs are not insignificant. Furthermore, it's this governing body's obligation to plan to ensure the continued sustainability of the utility. And for that reason, the Village Council has made a commitment to the future viability of Ridgewood Water. I'm certain my council colleagues recognize that the rate-making process is a balancing act among competing interests, especially so in this situation, and I hope others involved in this process understand that balancing act as well. Especially important since we're not strangers to one another, we're neighbors, we know each other. I'd also like to point out the respect this council has for the legal process. One example is that upon reading the court's opinion and order directing council to act, we sought out an independent expert with no prior ties to the village or this utility, and who was considered by many in the utility world in this state to be the very best in rate studies and establishing rates. We were determined to live with whatever answer and final opinion he determined to be necessary from his rate study. The fact that the village paid for his fees was ordered by the court, so those who stated this to be a problem or conflict are without basis in those comments. As a practical matter, I think it's important to focus on where Ridgewood Water's rates are in comparison to other communities and other utilities in the area. Ours are highly competitive and remain some of the lowest in this area. The market itself validates the rates charged by the Ridgewood Water utility. Whether our neighbors accept it or not, Ridgewood taxpayers have often subsidized the utility, leading part to the lower rates charged. Mr. Woods said in response to a challenge from one speaker that he reviewed the expenses and revenue of the water utility in 2009 and found that if the cost had been allocated properly, the utility was $2.2 million short of what it needed to operate. To be clear, Ridgewood taxpayers would have made up the shortfall, taxpayers of this village. What sparked this litigation was a 21% rate increase in 2010 and subsequent 5% increases in 2011 and 2012, resulting in a 31% increase. The outrage expressed chooses to ignore two very important facts. First, there's been no rate increase between 2004 and 2010. If that same 31% increase had been averaged over budgeted years between 2004 and 2012, the annual increase would have been significantly less. Indeed, that yearly percentage increase is further reduced to less than 3% if including all the current years, most recent years, of 0% increase. We've heard nothing about those years. Second, the direct cost, salary and benefits for utility employees, equipment, and chemicals needed to the operation of the utility and water itself that utility needed to purchase from outside sources rose almost 60% during that same period, but there was no increase in the water rates to keep up with the rise in cost. The upset expressed in this matter focused on indirect allocations, yet costs rose only 18% during that same period. The rate increases here were not driven by the village, but by actual costs to run the utility. And as Mr. Woods noted in response to a resident's question, Ridgewood taxpayers, in fact, subsidized the operation of the water utility for 2008 and 2009, if not earlier. Indirect allocations pay for the cost of services provided by the village of Ridgewood to the water utility. The court and even plaintiffs' experts agreed that it would be inequitable for the ratepayers not to pay for services they were receiving. The other option is to have the water utility function as a separate unit of government with its own complete staff of personnel, legal, finance, purchasing, and administration. That would be costly, and all ratepayers would pay those increased costs. In fact, on June 25th, Mr. Woods responded to the same question, indicating the shared service arrangements between the Village of Ridgewood and the Ridgewood Water is efficient and directly benefits ratepayers in the form of lower rates. In reviewing Mr. Woods' report and follow-up rebuttal report prepared by Exeter and in assessing testimony, several observations are made. Mr. Woods, as directed by the court, presented an independent review and did not seek input from any stakeholders. Both Exeter representatives, Ms. Sherwood and Mr. Morgan, indicated several drafts were exchanged with plaintiff's attorney before a final report was settled on. It was difficult for me to discern which parts of the Exeter report were prepared by Ms. Sherwood or Mr. Morgan. The unsigned and undated Exeter report, tantamount to a critique of Mr. Wood's report, fails to name contributors to the final product. Furthermore, neither of the Exeter witnesses exhibited an understanding or familiarity with the Ridgewood water utility, operations, logistics, property locations, sizes, conditions, or other details. Neither appeared to offer any testimony to suggest a modicum of understanding of enterprise accounting. In several arbitrary instances, Mr. Morgan inextricably and inappropriately connected allocation decisions directly to the water delivery system and summarily dismissed those allocations. Neither had any knowledge that the court had previously recognized the legitimacy of the same allocations they removed. Based on their own testimony, Mr. Morgan and Ms. Sherwood made no effort to communicate with Ridgewood Water or the Village of Ridgewood to understand the operations of the utility. Clearly, rate-making or such a critique requires some level of knowledge and understanding of a system design, logistics, operations, water safety, customer service, and other factors that may relate to setting rates, fees, and charges. Howard Wood's report and testimony referred to 14 allocation factors developed to allocate shared service costs to the water utility and back to the village using principles described in the AWWA M1 manual. Based on expert testimony and cross-examination, I accept there is a recognition the manual does not outline specifics about allocations, but instead relies on different methodologies to recover the cost associated with the water system in an effective, efficient, fair, and equitable manner. Albeit not an exact science, appropriate rate setting must avoid any unfair subsidies. Based on his report and testimony, Wood used both actuals and budget in his analysis to recalculate the appropriate rates for the years in question. Mr. Morgan's testimony indicated a lack of familiarity with this aspect of the Woods report. According to Woods, the comparison of revenues at actual rates to the reallocated actual expenses showed a close agreement between the revenue requirement and the revenues generated. This alone suggests that any downward adjustment would undoubtedly result in a subsidy. Oh, I'm sorry.
Someone else says the same thing.
No, she told me to slow down, right?
That's what I was saying, where she needs to
Okay,
be
shh,
covered by letting her go.
not from the audience. Okay, I'll go back.
On purpose. I'm leaving on my own.
Go ahead.
According to Woods, the comparison of revenues at actual rates to the reallocated actual expenses shows close agreement between the revenue requirement and the revenues generated. This alone suggests that any downward adjustment would undoubtedly result in a subsidy shouldered once again by Ridgewood taxpayers. Additionally, both Morgan and Woods agreed that retroactive rate making is uniformly avoided in the industry. Accordingly, in New Jersey, if a regulated water utility over-earns, there's an adjustment to the utility rates going forward, but it does not make retroactive rate adjustments. Conversely, if the utility under-earns, a rate adjustment must be made to meet future revenue requirements. According to Woods, the development of the utility's revenue requirement is the basis for the setting of the overall level of the utility rates, while providing the utility with adequate and sustainable funding levels, both operating and capital cost. In developing the revenue requirement for the water utility, Woods and Associates reviewed the actual expenses incurred and booked for the years 2009 through 2012 and conducted a review of the entire village budget by line item to identify shared costs that must be allocated. The result of normalizing those values and reversing same was a cost center accounting of expenses directly incurred to develop the revenue requirement. Allocation factors developed based on averaging and normalizations appear to be appropriate and, according to testimony, also supported by the M1 principles. During the court proceedings, Judge Frischer pointed out the lack of discussion among council members during the original public hearings establishing the water rate increases. The absence of discussion left a perception that there was no basis for the then council's decision. Notwithstanding the likelihood former council members may have conducted an ample review of background materials provided in advance of work session and public meetings, I agree that the absence of discussion left a void in establishing the record. The independent report by Woods and Associate, respectfully compliant with Judge Frisch's order, in my opinion, properly establishes the methodology for allocation factors and appropriately addresses the issues of indirect allocations. Finding the Woods report credible and thorough and his testimony consistent, independent, and unwavering, I agree with Mr. Woods' conclusions regarding those allocations. In contrast, I reiterate my concerns about the Exeter report and relying on the testimony of Mr. Morgan and Ms. Sherwood in determining my opinion that their report is neither independent nor reliable. During testimony, cross-examination, and comment, much was made of the allocation for police, and I agree with Councilman Hache that I think it was $38,000 or $39,000, the amount of time spent on that. Comparisons were made to policing services provided by Glen Rock, Wyckoff, and Midland Park. It's important to note that Ridgewood Water pays property taxes in each of the 3 municipalities involved in this litigation. As such, continued policing of Ridgewood Water properties by these towns is appropriate and expected. As it relates to the transfer of surplus, the water utility borrows money based on our outstanding AAA credit rating of the village, allowing for lower interest rates for bonds issued by the village. The ratepayers, including Wyckoff, Midland Park, and Glen Rock, benefit from the low rate of interest charged on village bonds. Therefore, the transfer of surplus compensates the village for both the risks it takes in issuing the debt and the exposure the village faces for both financial and legal liability occurring as a result of the water utility's operations. It compensates the village for those years when the village, because the utility either can't or hasn't paid for services provided, in fact subsidizes water utility operations. And once again, those are the taxpayers of the village of Ridgewood. As the owner of the utility, state law recognizes that the village has the right to transfer a reasonable amount of surplus. The criticism of the village taking surplus might be appropriate if the water utility were not able to produce the extremely competitive rate that it offers its ratepayers, as I noted earlier. Ridgewood water rates are less than most of the surrounding communities, undoubtedly a result of the efficient operation based on responsible stewardship and shared services with the village of Ridgewood. I believe the transfer of the reasonable amount of surplus to the village current fund is appropriate since it is the village that is at risk if the water utility has an insufficient amount to pay its debt, and at some point in the future, none of the plaintiffs in this matter are at risk. Ridgewood taxpayers alone assume the all associated risks. In closing, it seems to me this matter got out of hand early in the process. Although none of the people on this dais, and probably none on the dais in Wyckoff, Midland Park, or Glen Rock, were part of that initial frenzy, this matter must end. It really needs to end. I don't think anyone can reasonably argue that Ridgewood Water Utility is not a first-rate, well-run operation. It provides clean, safe drinking water at an extremely competitive price. In light of the foregoing, I will vote yes on Ordinance 3636. I hope this council and all future village councils will commit to working cooperatively with elected officials from Glen Rock, Midland Park, and Wyckoff on behalf of all our constituents and continue to ensure the excellence of both the water and service provided by Ridgewood Water. Thank you. And so with that,
I move that Ordinance 3636 be adopted on 6th reading and final publication is required by law.
Second.
Hache,
Yes.
Seaton,
Yes.
Walsh,
Yes.
and Newton.
yes.
Councilman Voigt is absent.
Okay. I move the clerk read Ordinance 3637 by title on the 6th reading and the public hearing thereon be open.
Second.
Hache,
Yes.
Seaton,
Yes.
Walsh,
Yes.
and Newton.
Yes. Will the clerk please read the title of Ordinance 3637?
An ordinance to amend Chapter 145 of the Code of the Village of Ridgewood fees at Section 145-6, enumeration of fees relating to code chapters.
The hearing on Ordinance 3637 was continued to this evening's meeting from the meeting on June 25th, 2018. Each speaker will be limited to 5 minutes. The public hearing is now continued. Okay. You come on up. The public hearing is open.
Russ Camp, 34 3rd Street, Midland Park Council. With regard to water rates established for this year, may I ask, is it 1.8 million still for capital improvements?
I'm going to have Mr. Calby come up so that he can answer.
I just have a couple of questions
some
specifically.
questions. So he's the director of Ridgewood Water, so we'll have him come up. And Mr. Calby, if you'll sit on this side of the, as it's set up, so that the audience can hear you.
And hopefully the court reporter will be able to take his testimony as well. If you can't hear Mr. Calby, just let us know.
Mr. Timoney, Dan Timoney is also here. He's the business manager for Ridgewood Water. Hold on 1 minute while the court reporter sets up.
If you could just bear with me a second, I want to get you the exact number.
Rich?
Yes.
You have to wait for the court reporter?
Oh, sorry. Good. All right, thank you. From that time I found it. The number you're referring to, I believe the 1.28 million, so that's the amount that was approved in capital, but prior to that, there was a $3.57 million capital ordinance approved for the car treatment plant. In addition to that, there's $1,360,000 in pay-go capital. That's part of the operating budget. So all in total for 18, there's close to $7 million of capital that was approved.
All right, and so my question is, how much of that is being allocated to the other districts as opposed to just Ridgewood?
The car project is here in Ridgewood. It's actually right up the block from here at our car plant. That water does go throughout the whole low zone, so it services all 4 municipalities. That's one of our largest treatment plants, about 1 million gallons a day.
Okay.
It's been offline since January 2017. This new treatment will be online sometime next spring. The remaining projects do include tanks, including the Ames tank in Wyckoff, the East Side tank, which is here in Ridgewood. Those are the last 2 tanks that will be done as part of our rehab program we've been doing over the last 3 years. We've recently completed Lafayette tank in Wyckoff. Earlier, the prior year, we did the Glen tank in Midland Park, Aqueduct tanks in Midland Park. So we're wrapping up the tank improvements.
Okay, so is it safe to say the difference in the 6% increase relative to the national inflation rate of 2.5% is all related to capital?
I wouldn't say all. A good portion of it is also a metering program, customer service, because the fixed service charge that is being increased as part of this ordinance, the volume rate is not being changed. The fixed charge is meant to cover those costs, capital improvements, metering, customer service. The volume rate's meant to cover the balance of another 80% of the real expenses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if you look at it that way, the 6% increase it's to benefit all ratepayers.
Okay, and then my last question, and thank you very much for your answers. I believe you said this is the 3rd year of a 6-year plan. And so how much additional capital should we expect to see in the budgets over the next 3 years? And what % will be allocated to Ridgewood versus the other districts? Do we know?
I couldn't tell you the allocation, but I can tell you this $46 million is just the beginning. This only just touches the sources of our system. After that, I expect at least another $45 million in distribution improvements. All our pipes, hydrants, valves, everything you don't see in the ground, 100-year-old pipes. After that, based on emerging contaminant rules, we're probably looking at another $160 million in new treatment. So that we're just touching the surface right now.
And what is that going to equate? I mean, because that's a scary number, obviously, a series of scary numbers. What can we as ratepayers expect to see in terms of the impact on our bills? Which many people think are high. I mean, they may be relatively comparable to other areas, but we all believe that they're fairly high.
I shared a table with the administrators and council people that attended a work session we had where we presented the budget that was shown to the village council. And part of that chart showed where Ridgewood Water is comparatively to other utilities. We're right in the middle. There's several that are much, much higher than we are. And we even projected on that form with this current increase that's being discussed in this ordinance where would still be in the middle. So we are very competitive. Where you'd expect that we're going to go, every year since I've been here, we do a projection on the budget. We look about 10 years out. This year we've looked 3 years out, knowing where this $46 million is going in particular, because debt service is going to increase greatly. We eventually have to start paying for the loans that we're taking out. We've infused operating budget with pay-go capital to avoid that, but still there's a large majority that we have to bond for. So with that projection, if you're looking for a clear answer, it's not exact. After this ordinance for this year, I would expect on average anywhere from 4 to 6% increase moving forward, but that's variable.
Sure.
We could have a very good revenue year this year, and some more surplus can come in and balance what's spent this year. Things can change in the budget that we projected in terms of expense. Every year we relook at it. Howard Wood said it best. You just look at the snapshot of that year, what that revenue requirement is. But then at the end of the year, we balance that off of what we actually spent.
Sure. No, understandable. And hopefully the interest rate environment will stay as low as it has been.
And
I mean, obviously that impacts debt service.
And I want to tell you, and I thank the council for the comments, but we're taking it even further. We've gotten involved in Trenton. We're lobbying legislature. We're trying to get more grants. We're trying to expand the loan programs that the state has, because water has not had its day. Everything's about transportation, so it's about time to pay attention to water industry.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tim Shanley, Wyckoff, Township Committeeman. Mr. Calvary, thank you. I was at that meeting with our Township Administrator. So from what I understand, Ordinance 3637 is just increasing the meter fees, not the volume. Is that correct?
Correct.
And thank you. You showed us at that meeting how it was out of line with Suez and I believe American Water, and how you were bringing it up to be more in line with other water companies, but not at their levels. You didn't hit their levels. Is that correct?
Yes, the second utility is Passaic Valley Water Commission.
Right. Thank you. And that's why I wasn't initially going to come up, but I figured since you were up there, I wanted to thank you for the meeting and showing that we could understand. So I don't have an objection to those rate increases for those fixed meters, because they're a little out of line with the other water companies. So I'm showing I can work with you guys, and everything doesn't have to be adversarial. And I do apologize for my colleague. I don't know if he's back, but we are willing to work with you, and that's why I had suggested, because all this is falling on you, setting up a committee to explore a municipal utilities authority, so all 4 municipalities, Wyckoff, Glenrock, Midland Park, and Ridgewood, are equally represented at setting the rates and running the water company. And you could do it based upon the amount of ratepayers that you have. Ridgewood would have more representation on an MUA, because you have the most ratepayers. So I will renew that again to consider that, because we've been very adversarial for years. I wasn't there at the start of it, you were correct. I think only 2 members of our township committee are still on it. It's Rudy Boonstra and Brian Scanlon, who is our current mayor, were part of that initial back in 2009, 2010 when this all started. And that's why I suggested early on in this process of this hearing, why don't we sit down and try to resolve this matter, because this is going to continue on, I fear, going on down the line unless we sit down and try to resolve this amongst all 4 municipalities, because we don't want this to continue. But thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to thank you for the opportunity once again to be able to speak on Ordinance 3637.
Identify yourself if you would, Mr.
Yeah, name and
I'm
address.
sorry. Name is Mark Baronius, live in Midland Park, 35 Plain Street. 35 Plain, Plane. B as in boy, Raunius. I too share the concern of water conservation as has been really brought on by Councilwoman Walsh at our last meeting. I guess my real concern is with this particular rate hike on the connection fees. It seems to me that we're not hitting the people that we should be hitting for the rate increase. We are hitting everybody, not the abusers. You're not showing conservation when you go across the board, and especially with your common 5/8 water connection, which is over 17,000 connections, that they are getting an increase, and if the increase went with rate flow, you would be hitting those that are not conserving. I think the way you're doing it right now, by hitting everybody, is not portraying conservation to the ratepayers at this given point. I think if you could go and put a formula in that is the average use of water used by a household, and then anything that exceeds that have a surcharge, then you would be forcing people to conserve water. The way we're doing it across the board right now with connections, if you take an elderly person, the only one in the house, they're getting hit with the same rate charge as a family of 6 using 6 times as much water. I know the flow rate, they're still getting charged more, but they're not being penalized for it. Just a suggestion, you know. The connection fees is really a 40% increase in connection fees. It's a 6% increase across the board, but when you calculate it out, it's a 40% increase on connection fees. You know, it's something that I feel really has to be looked at to try to make it fair and to try to force conservation of the water at this given point. And we all know the only way you conserve, and I heard it talked about here the other night, that abusers should get a fine. Okay, this is not encouraging that at this given point. You're not encouraging conservation, you know. Last but not least, we've hit on this a lot throughout all these proceedings, and many of my colleagues here have asked that, you know, the biggest problem we have is representation from the 3 communities. You know, I liken it, unfortunately, we're coming on July 4th, and many years ago, our forefathers started a revolution because we had taxation without representation. I think that's what we're feeling as the 3 communities. We really have no representation to Ridgewood Water and how it structures its rate, how its money is being spent, and what is happening. And I would like you to consider these areas and see if we can come together as a full community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other come on up. Come on up. Loud and clear.
Thomas Madigan from Wyckoff. I know we just all heard, and I do have a couple of specific questions from Mr. Calvi, from all the council members. They expounded on Ridgewood Water and how they was recognized as being so well run. So we just like a clarification. I believe you have 51 wells, is that correct?
52.
52. And out of the 52, as of today, how many are operational?
39.
39. So approximately 25% are currently not operational?
I can't do that math. I think it's a third, close to a third.
Okay. And the plan, you just told us on this 36, 37, you're going to add, I think you said 2 wells, if I understood you correctly?
5 wells will be online next spring. Another 2 will be re-drilled. Total of 7.
Okay, so 5, that would mean you'd have 44 out of 51. correct? Or 52?
46. 46 out of 52.
Okay, but you'd still have 15% not operational, correct?
Again, I would have to calculate the percentage, but if that's
Again,
what
because we're
it is.
talking about efficiencies and
Sure.
water restrictions year after year after year. And you also just told us about all the capital plans going forward when my colleague, Mr. Camp from Midland Park, asked you. So I'm just curious, if Ridgewood Water is so well-run, why is the need for such dramatic capital over these next several years, including where you said replacing 100-year-old pipes and all this infrastructure, because if it's that well-run?
Like many other utilities in the state and the country, they were neglected for decades. So now, all these structures at the end of their useful life. So, unfortunately, every utility has to take on that burden now of replenishing those systems and rebuilding them. Some cases from the very ground up. I've been here 3 years now. Actually, last week was my anniversary, being here 3 years. Since I stepped in the door, I realized that the need to do that. And fortunately, I got the great support of this council to go forward with that $46 million plan. But as I mentioned in the answer, that's not the end. There's more to go. Those wells have been out of service for decades. And our goal is to get as many of them as back online as we can, but that can't happen overnight. To drill a new well, then get the permission to put it back online, provide the treatment for it, that takes years.
Okay. And again, I just want to compliment you personally. I've had some dealings with you. You've been very professional, very accommodating, very open-minded, and I know it's very appreciated.
Thank you.
And this is the last comment, question, whatever you want to call it. I'm just concerned that, we just went through something, we just went through an issue that we can't talk about because we're on a 36-37, where we talked all this surplus, and now we're going to be spending a lot of money due to negligence over the years. So it just concerns me, and I think it's something the council should take in consideration.
Okay. Come on up. Name and address for the record.
Rudy Boonstra, Boonstra, Township Committee member from Wyckoff. I am one of the few remaining governing body members who was present when this all started, and I promise not to go on a trip down memory lane here tonight. What I'm here to ask about or talk about is the capital project, which has some pretty extraordinary numbers, as stated by Councilman Camp from Midland Park. But I have a question as it relates to Wyckoff. We have an area in Wyckoff now in which no new hookups are being permitted, called the booster zone. Are there any other areas in the entire system where that occurs, or is it just I don't know, it's just our area in Wyckoff?
Currently, right now, is a moratorium on all connections throughout the entire system.
Throughout the entire system. Why is that?
Because the utility doesn't have adequate firm capacity to serve the system. Based on the number of wells that are out of service.
Okay, so any of the new construction I see in other areas covered by Ridgewood Water necessitate the drilling of wells? Do I have that correct? Because that is the situation in Wyckoff.
But this GAC project, this Carr Avenue improvement, will solve that deficit initially, so those developments will be allowed to continue. But the booster zone in particular will always have a moratorium on it because there's no gravity storage in that zone.
So let's come back to that, because I would also note that we have a 4-lot subdivision going on and several single-home projects within the booster zone, which the developers have to drill wells, which seems inconsistent with having a public water utility servicing the area. In fact, on the one cul-de-sac, I believe, we're going to have a fire hydrant, but it's not going to be activated, which is a public safety issue to some degree. We also have the Vista project in Wyckoff, which I believe Ridgewood Water is not capable of servicing, so they're going to be supplied by Hawthorne Water Utility. That's the case. I don't know if Ridgewood has been approached to service that, but part of the project is physically located in Hawthorne, so they can do a connect in Hawthorne and service the entire 700,000 square foot building with Hawthorne water. And just to continue on the booster zone again, parochially speaking from Wyckoff, what is the plan, other than the 85-foot tower? Is there any plan to alleviate the situation in the booster zone?
It's part of it.
I mean, you know, Mayor just said it's a well-run utility, you should have a plan, because, and the reason I ask that is, we've been down, now I will go down memory lane a little bit, we've been down the road with the 85-foot tower off Marywood a couple times, and that, in all honesty, if it came up again, would probably result in our dreaded protracted litigation with neighbors in the township. So I asked the question.
Yeah, I don't know the whole history behind that project. I just know it's decades old. There were many attempts to build a gravity storage tank in the booster zone. It unfortunately never happened due to neighbor concerns. But the booster zone tank is part of that $46 million capital plan. And it's actually the beginnings of its start next year.
Same design tank, or something?
No, we're
something
looking
that
at...
might be a little more acceptable in neighborhoods.
We're looking at different options.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, with that, I move the public hearing be closed.
Second.
Ashay?
Yes.
Seaton?
Yes.
Boyd is absent. Walsh?
Yes.
And Newton.
Yes.
I move that ordinance 3637 be adopted on sixth reading and final publication as required by law.
Second.
Ashay?
Yes.
Seaton?
Yes.
Voigt is absent. Walsh?
Yes.
And Newton.
Yes. Okay. With that, we go back to public comment, not to exceed 5 minutes per person. So if anybody has a public comment, come on up. Time to share. There we go.
Coming back.
Good evening again.
Hi, good evening. Greg Brown, 444 Linwood Ave. I just wanted to follow up on what I learned earlier, was that both, I guess, Wyckoff and Midland Park both have ordinances that deal with the different stages for water restrictions. So I learned something new. So my follow-up to that would be, are there, when you violate the restrictions that they have in for both those towns, are summonses being issued to those people who violate? And when that money is collected, where is that actual money going? Because it was my understanding on Monday through testimony that when a summons is issued in Ridgewood, that money goes back into the water utility in the miscellaneous fund. So, thank you.
You could go to the other towns and ask the questions there about those issues.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay, very good. With that, we'll close public comments and take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you.
No, before.
I was chasing Hunter around. Thank you very much.
Because I know that was an issue for you. Yeah, well, good. I'm glad. I mean, we did kind of the same thing when we had to deal with that.